The November rain hammered against the glass doors of San Francisco General Hospital like 1,000 angry fists demanding entry. The neon emergency sign reflected blood red across the wet pavement at 2:14 in the morning on a Wednesday, the kind of hour when only the desperate and the broken stumbled through these halls. Cassandra Morales collapsed against the intake desk, and the sound of her hitting the linoleum was small, insignificant, the noise of something finally breaking. 26 years old, but life had aged her by decades. Her hair plastered wet against her pale face. Her delivery uniform torn at the shoulder, soaking wet, clinging to her body like a second skin of defeat. Blood ran from a gash above her left eye, mixing with rainwater on her cheeks in rivulets of red and clear. Her shaking fist held $78 in crumpled bills. $78. This was all she had left in the world. The nurse behind the desk moved toward her, but Cassandra could not speak. Could not explain. She could only collapse, her breathing ragged and broken, her whole body trembling from cold and fear and something deeper, the trembling of someone who had finally reached the absolute end of their rope. Behind her, 3 men in black suits went absolutely still. The waiting room, nearly empty at this hour, seemed to hold its breath. Rocco and Theo exchanged a glance. Their boss stood near the window, motionless, watching the rain streak the glass. Salvatore Russo was a man accustomed to chaos. He owned chaos. He commanded it like a general surveying a battlefield. But something in his shoulders tensed. Something in the way his jaw clenched. The photograph fell from Cassandra's pocket. It landed face up on the tile floor, and the image on it was of a little girl, no more than 7 years old, with dark eyes that held a haunting familiarity. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. Salvatore stepped forward. Just one step. But in 15 years of working for him, Rocco and Theo had never seen him move toward suffering. They had seen him move toward power. Toward threats. Toward opportunities to expand his empire. But never toward pain that was not his own. "Call Dr. Reeves," Salvatore said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Tell him we are here." The nurses moved immediately. Not because of the hospital hierarchy. Because of what they recognized in his tone, a man accustomed to having his words become reality. But what she did not know, as she lay bleeding on that cold tile floor, was that Salvatore Russo had been watching her. Following her. For weeks now, he had tracked her movements through the rain-slicked streets of San Francisco with the precision of a man hunting something far more precious than vengeance. Every night when she left his estate, where she worked as a night maid earning minimum wage, he had watched from the shadows. Every delivery run on her battered scooter. Every stop at the shelter on 5th Street where a traumatized child named Emma waited for her return. Tonight, when 3 of Robert Hargrove's men cornered her in the alley behind the restaurant on Mission Street, when they demanded money she did not have and left her bleeding when she could not provide it, Salvatore had been there. Not close enough to intervene. But close enough to watch. Close enough to see exactly how far her desperation had driven her. She had abandoned the scooter 3 blocks back, stumbling through the rain toward the only place she could think of, the hospital. The emergency room. A place where even someone with $78 in her pocket might receive help. The photograph on the floor showed a child with Salvatore's late wife's eyes. His wife, Maria, had been gone for 3 years. But her DNA, her shape, her haunting dark stare, it lived on in this little girl who waited for Cassandra Morales to return each night. Salvatore picked up the photograph. Water dripped from his expensive cashmere coat, worth more than Cassandra's entire annual salary. His fingers, decorated with silver rings bearing the family crest, held the image with surprising gentleness. "Get her to a private room," he commanded. "Full workup. And call that child psychologist Dr. Hayes. Tell her to come now." Rocco's eyes widened slightly. This was not protocol. This was not how their boss operated. This was something new. Something that broke the rules. Within 30 seconds, 2 orderlies appeared with a gurney. They lifted Cassandra with practiced efficiency, and she was wheeled toward the back of the emergency department, toward the fluorescent lights and the machines that would scan and measure and document her injuries. A gash 2 inches long above her left eye. Bruising on her ribs where a fist had connected. A sprained wrist. Exposure to the November rain for 3 hours. The doctor would ask her how it happened. She would tell him the truth in a voice barely audible, about the men in the alley, about the money she could not pay, about the way they had pushed her against the brick wall and demanded answers to questions she had no answers for. What she would not tell him was why they wanted money from her in the first place. What she would not explain was the eviction notice sitting in her pocket, the one with the red ink deadline that read, 12 days remaining. 12 days to produce $300,000 or watch every child at the Mercy shelter be scattered into the foster system. Salvatore Russo stood in the waiting room for another moment, the photograph still in his hand. The rain continued to hammer against the glass doors. The neon sign continued to cast its bloody light across the pavement. "Rocco," he said quietly. "Find out everything about her. Where she came from. Who her family is. What she lost. I want to know her entire life by morning." "Yes, sir," Rocco replied, already pulling out his phone. "And Theo," Salvatore continued, turning to his other lieutenant. "The child. Emma. Find out who she is. Find out why she is at that shelter. Find out everything." Theo nodded. "Should I?" Quietly, Salvatore interrupted. "No one can know we are asking." The lieutenants moved like ghosts toward the exit, melting into the November night. Salvatore remained, standing alone in the fluorescent brightness of the emergency room waiting area, holding a photograph of a child with his wife's eyes, and something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. This child. This girl named Emma. She was somehow connected to Cassandra Morales. And if there was one thing Salvatore Russo understood after 37 years of living in the shadows, it was that God did not make mistakes. Coincidence was a luxury for people who believed in chance. He did not believe in chance. He believed in family. He believed in loyalty. And he believed that the universe occasionally offered second chances to men broken enough to recognize them. But he did not know yet what recognizing this second chance would cost him. He did not know about Victoria Ashford, the woman he had rejected years ago at a charity gala, the woman whose cruelty was as refined as her jewels and as sharp as a blade. He did not know that she was already in motion, already setting traps, already preparing to destroy Cassandra Morales as a way of destroying him. He did not know that his own nephew Marco, spoiled and vicious and emboldened by the mercy Salvatore had shown him, was working alongside Hargrove. That Marco believed weakness in his uncle represented an opportunity. That Marco was hungry in ways that would soon spiral into violence. All Salvatore knew was that somewhere in the back of this hospital, a woman who had carried only $78 in her pocket was being cared for. A woman who had lost everything 6 months ago in a fire. A woman who now delivered food in the rain for minimum wage and tutored a traumatized child for nothing at all because that child trusted her completely. The rain outside intensified. The sound of it against the glass doors created a rhythm like a heartbeat, like something alive and desperate and struggling to survive. Now let us go back to the beginning. To 6 months earlier. To the night when Cassandra Morales lost everything and the fire consumed not just the walls of her apartment but the walls of every dream she had ever constructed. 6 months earlier, the smell hit first. Burning plastic. Burning wood. Burning dreams wrapped in paper and turned to ash. Cassandra Morales stood outside her apartment building on Valencia Street at 3 in the morning, wearing borrowed pajamas that belonged to her neighbor, watching orange flames claw their way up the brick facade like something alive and furious and determined to erase her from existence. The fire had started on the 3rd floor. Her floor. Her room. Gone. Firefighters moved like shadows through the smoke, their radios crackling in a language of urgency and procedure. Water arced from their hoses in desperate streams, but the flames had already won. They had already consumed the textbook stacked on her desk, $2,400 worth of nursing prerequisites, each one marked with her careful handwriting in the margins. Pharmacology. Anatomy. Microbiology. 3 years of community college, paid for in shifts at diners, in tips that added up to dollars, in nights when she had eaten nothing but stolen bread from the restaurant walk-in so she could afford to pay tuition. Glass shattered on the 3rd floor. The sound pierced through the roar of the fire like a scream. She clutched one photograph. Just one. Her sister Maria, dead 5 years now from the same disease Cassandra had been training to fight. Maria at age 12, smiling in the parking lot of a mall they could never afford to shop in. The photograph was the only thing her neighbor had handed her when she pulled her from the building. Everything else, her clothes, her laptop with 3 years of coursework stored in its hard drive, her nursing certificates, her certificates of completion from every course she had sacrificed sleep to pass, all of it was burning. A man in a blue shirt approached her. The landlord. His name was Robert Hargrove, and he moved with the casual indifference of someone who owned buildings the way other men collected watches. "Insurance will cover most of it," he said. He handed her a check. $1,200. "That's your personal property limit. Sorry about your luck." He walked away before she could speak. $1,200 for 12,000 in destroyed textbooks. $1,200 for a laptop that had cost her 8 months of food rationing. $1,200 for 6 years of planning to become something more than invisible. The November rain came 3 months later. Cassandra leaned into the handlebars of her red scooter, the engine sputtering and coughing like a dying animal as she navigated the wet streets of San Francisco. The bike was 10 years old, held together by duct tape and the kind of desperation that had no other choice. Rain soaked through her jacket, a thin thing from Goodwill, faded from black to gray, and dripped down her neck in cold rivulets. The GPS on her phone directed her to Pacific Heights. A delivery of pad thai for $47. She had it in the insulated bag strapped to her chest, steam still rising from the container. 6 miles in the rain. The tip would be $3 if she was lucky. $2 if she was not. No tip if the food arrived cold, which it would because the scooter's heating function had failed 3 months ago. The address was a mansion set back from the street, its windows glowing with warm light. She could see them through the glass, a man and woman on a leather sofa, the kind of leather that probably cost more than she made in a month. She knocked on the polished oak door. Waited. The door opened 2 inches. "Is it hot?" the woman asked. "Yes." The door opened wider. The man appeared behind her, and Cassandra saw his eyes move from her soaked jacket to her shaking hands to the logo on the delivery bag. She saw the calculation happen in his face. The decision. She held out the food. "That'll be $47.50, Cassandra said. The woman took the bag. Closed the door. No words. No thank you. No tip. The door clicked shut, and Cassandra stood on the marble porch in the rain, her hand still extended, holding nothing. She had $340 in her bank account. St. Catherine's shelter occupied a converted Victorian on Folsom Street, its paint peeling like skin from an old wound. Inside, it smelled like industrial soup and pine cleaner. Cassandra arrived at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, her hair still damp from the rain, her jacket draped over a radiator in the hallway. Father Miguel found her in the hallway, his face deeply lined from years of collecting other people's sorrows. "We have someone new," he said. "A girl. 7 years old. She came to us 6 weeks ago from the Embarcadero. We still do not know where she was before that. She has not spoken since we found her. Not a word. She will not make eye contact. Will not eat unless another child sits beside her." They walked down a hallway lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Children's drawings covered the walls, crayon suns, stick figure families, houses with hearts instead of windows. The marks of trying to make something beautiful in a place built from loss. Emma sat in the corner of the reading room, a small dark shape hunched over a picture book she was not reading. Her black hair fell across her face. Her hands lay flat on the table, palms down, as if she were trying to press herself into invisibility. "Emma, this is Miss Cassandra," Father Miguel said. "She is going to read with you tonight." Cassandra sat on the floor beside the table, which meant she was lower than Emma, which meant she was not a threat. She opened a picture book about a rabbit who had lost his mother. She did not ask Emma to look at it. She did not ask Emma anything. She simply read aloud, her voice steady and quiet, describing the illustrations as if Emma were not there, as if this story was something she was telling to herself. 20 minutes passed. The rain intensified outside the shelter's windows. It struck the glass in rhythm, like something alive, like a heartbeat struggling to survive. 30 minutes passed. Emma's small hand reached out. Her fingers, thin as bird bones, touched the page where the rabbit found a new family. Not his real family, but people who chose to stay when the darkness came. Cassandra did not move. She did not speak. She turned the page and kept reading. 300 miles away, in a mansion that occupied the entire corner of California and Grant Avenue, Salvatore Russo sat in his study surrounded by silence and the weight of 3 years. The photograph lay on his desk. His daughter. Dark eyes. Black hair. 7 years old in this image, taken by his brother the night everything shattered. She would be 10 now. 10 years old somewhere in this city, or this state, or this country, growing up without knowing her father's name. The walls of his study were lined with books he did not read. Outside his windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds. He owned 12 buildings in this city. He controlled 5 restaurants, 3 nightclubs, a private hospital, and the kind of power that made men move out of his way on crowded streets. But he could not find his daughter. All of his power, all of his money, all of his connections in the darkest corners of this city had not brought her home. Rocco entered without knocking. Rocco had worked for Salvatore for 17 years, and he understood the language of silence. "The new night maid starts tomorrow," Rocco said. "Her name is Cassandra Morales. References check out. She has been cleaning private homes for the last 8 months. Careful. Quiet. Stays invisible." Salvatore did not look up from the photograph. "Fine," he said. He did not know yet that the woman entering his house tomorrow would carry a child's photograph in her pocket. He did not know that this child's name was Emma. He did not know that Emma had his wife's eyes, the eyes of a woman dead for 4 years, and that the universe occasionally offers second chances to men broken enough to recognize them, even when those chances arrive disguised as coincidence. What changed everything was a simple thing. What changed everything was a woman arriving at his mansion at 6 in the evening, carrying a mop and a bucket and the weight of $340, and beginning to clean the floor where his daughter's photograph had rested untouched for 1,095 days. The November rain fell like a blade wrapped in ice, slicing through the empty corridors of the San Francisco shelter at 9:30 in the evening. Cassandra Morales stood at the edge of the chapel, her hand trembling as she held the red-inked eviction notice. 12 days. The words burned into her vision like a scar. 12 days until Robert Hargrove's construction crews arrived to turn this sanctuary into luxury condominiums, scattering 42 children into a system designed to swallow them whole. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out everything she had left in the world, $78 in crumpled bills and loose coins. $78 against 300,000. The mathematics of despair. Little Emma sat in the corner, drawing with colored pencils, yellows and reds and blues, the girl who had not spoken a complete sentence to anyone until Cassandra arrived 6 months ago with a mop and infinite patience. Emma looked up, her eyes mirror-bright with the kind of intuition children possess. She did not ask what the notice meant. She simply moved closer and pressed her small hand against Cassandra's leg, understanding in that wordless way that something had shifted in their world. The shelter's director, Father Miguel, appeared in the doorway, his face aged by 30 years in the span of an afternoon. He had received Victoria Ashford in his office at noon. He had watched her examine his building like a predator assessing wounded prey. He had listened to her explain, with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from unlimited wealth, that the children would be relocated within 2 weeks. Robert Hargrove, who had owned this building for 8 years and collected rent with the patience of a man who knew it was never quite enough, had suddenly sold it to her for a price that made Father Miguel understand the decision had been made long before that morning. Cassandra worked 2 jobs now. By day, she delivered food for a company that paid $5.25 per hour plus tips that rarely materialized. By night, she came here to tutor Emma and the other children, reading stories, teaching mathematics through counting games, building something like hope out of nothing. She had lost everything in a fire 6 months ago: her apartment in the Mission District, her college textbooks spread across the kitchen table, the future she had been constructing one class at a time. The fire had taken 17 minutes to consume it all. She had been at work when the call came. By the time she arrived, the building was a skeleton of blackened wood and ash. She moved through the shelter's hallways after Emma had fallen asleep, wiping down tables, straightening chairs, existing in the quiet way that had become her native state. Invisible. Necessary but unseen. The kind of person who could stand in a room and be forgotten before she left it. She had become expert at invisibility. It was the only skill poverty truly teaches. What she did not know was that she was being watched. On the street outside, a black Mercedes sat with its engine running, exhaust rising in plumes into the November darkness. Inside, Salvatore Russo sat in the back seat, his frame folded into the leather interior like a weapon at rest. His suit cost more than Cassandra made in 3 months. The scars on his face ran like a map of violence from his left eye to his jaw, silvering at the temples made him look like a general surveying territory he had conquered and found himself exhausted by owning. Beside him sat Rocco, who had worked for Salvatore for 17 years and understood the language of obsession. Rocco cleared his throat quietly. "Boss. She is working a double shift. Delivery until 10, then she will be here until 6 in the morning." Salvatore did not respond. He was watching Cassandra through the shelter's ground floor window, watching her tuck Emma under a worn blanket, watching her press a kiss to the child's forehead with the kind of tenderness that comes only from love that has been tested and survived. His daughter had been missing for 3 years. The people who had taken her, his own brother, consumed by gambling debts and betrayal, had sold her to strangers. Salvatore's investigators had spent 1,095 days tracing the girl through a system designed to keep her lost. And then, 3 weeks ago, one of his men had photographed a woman and child at this shelter. The child's face, even in profile, even in the grainy security footage, had stopped Salvatore's heart. His wife had died 4 years ago. She had blue eyes and dark hair and a particular way of tilting her head when she listened. This child tilted her head the same way. 2 hours later, Cassandra emerged from the shelter's side entrance, pushing a battered scooter that coughed and wheezed like it might give up at any moment. The rain had not stopped. It fell in sheets across Mission Street, turning the pavement into a mirror of neon and darkness. She wore a jacket so thin it was barely a layer between her and the weather. Her lips were turning pale with cold. The black Mercedes remained exactly where it was, engine idling, its presence a secret she did not know she was keeping. 3 weeks earlier, Cassandra had been pushing this same scooter when it had broken down on a street corner at 11 in the evening. A black SUV had pulled up beside her, and 2 men in suits had emerged, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that belongs only to people trained in violence. Behind them came Marco Russo, age 28, Salvatore's nephew, wearing expensive leather and the kind of entitlement that comes from being born into power without having to earn it. Marco had circled her like something hunting. "You work for my uncle." Cassandra had not flinched. "I clean his floors." "I need leverage over him," Marco had said, and his voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never been told no and did not understand that some people would rather die than comply. "You tell me his schedule. His meetings. When he travels. Where he goes." She had refused. And when she refused, Marco had hit her, a backhand that split her lip and sent her stumbling backward, her scooter clattering against the pavement. His men had laughed. Marco had leaned close enough that she could smell the cologne and whine on him, that little girl at the shelter. "The one you are always with. I could make her disappear into a system so broken she would never be found again." All you gotta do is tell me what I want to know. Cassandra had spat blood onto the street and climbed back onto her scooter somehow, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the handlebars. She had ridden for 6 blocks before pulling into an alley and collapsing against the brick wall, her entire body trembling with a rage that had nowhere to go and no one to destroy. Now, with the eviction notice in her pocket and $78 representing the entirety of her remaining life, she was facing a timeline that had become a guillotine. 12 days until Emma was taken from her. 12 days until the shelter's doors were locked and boarded and the children were scattered into a foster system that was itself a kind of violence, bureaucratic, systematic, and complete. She pushed the scooter through the rain, her mind calculating numbers that did not calculate. $300,000. It existed in a universe so distant from her own that it might as well have been imaginary. She earned, on good days, $120. On bad days, $60. She spent $40 a week on rent for a room in a house with 6 other people sharing one bathroom and a kitchen that smelled of grease from every culture attempting to feed itself on nothing. Food cost $35 a week. The rest went to survival in increments so small they barely registered. She did not see the black Mercedes turn onto her street, maintaining exactly 3 car lengths of distance as she navigated the rain-slick roads back toward the Tenderloin where her room waited, cold and small and alone. What she did not know was that Salvatore Russo had made a decision that would reshape both their lives. 2 days earlier, Salvatore had summoned Rocco and Theo to his study. The walls were lined with books he did not read, windows overlooking a city that glittered with the kind of wealth that comes from controlling what people need most. Salvatore owned 12 buildings in San Francisco. He controlled restaurants and nightclubs and a private hospital where people arrived with problems the regular hospitals could not solve. His name opened doors in the darkness that most people did not know existed. But for 3 years, all of this power, all of this money, all of these connections in the deepest underground of the city had failed to bring his daughter home. Find out everything about Robert Hargrove, Salvatore had told them, his voice dropping to the register that meant people stopped breathing and started listening. Every transaction. Every debt. Every person he owes money to or fear to. And find Victoria Ashford. Find out why she suddenly wants a shelter in Soma. Find out what it costs her and what it earns her. Rocco had nodded, and the nephew. Marco is becoming a problem, Salvatore had said, and his hand had rested on the photograph on his desk, a woman with Cassandra's exact bone structure, a child with eyes that belonged to his dead wife. Rocco, if he moves against the girl again, he disappears. Do you understand me? By the next morning, Salvatore's investigators had delivered their findings. Robert Hargrove was in debt to the tune of $180,000 to a casino owner in Las Vegas. He owned property in 3 cities and was months behind on mortgage payments. Victoria Ashford had purchased the shelter's building from him for $350,000, a price that made no financial sense unless something else was at stake. Then the investigators found the connection. Victoria had once bid for a development contract in the Marina district. Salvatore had gotten that contract instead. She had lost $7 million when his offer undercut hers. She had never forgiven him. The shelter was not about profit. It was about revenge. That evening, Salvatore made a series of phone calls that took exactly 17 minutes. A title transfer was initiated. A bank account was accessed. By the time Cassandra arrived at the shelter for her evening shift, the building's ownership had changed hands once more. The eviction notice was void. The children were safe. But Salvatore did not tell her. Instead, he waited, watching from across the street as she moved through the shelter's hallways like a ghost moving through memory. He watched her hold Emma's hand. He watched her sing softly in Spanish, teaching the child words for colors and numbers and hope. He watched her love something that was not hers and do it with a completeness that seemed to cost her everything. And he understood, finally, why his investigators had been able to track her so easily. Because Cassandra Morales was someone who chose to be visible only when it mattered. She chose invisibility as a strategy and tenderness as a weapon. She chose, every single day, to stay. At 6 in the morning, when she finished her shift and stepped out into the gray light of a San Francisco dawn, the rain had finally stopped. Cassandra's scooter started on the third attempt. She rode toward the sunrise, her pocket still containing $78 and the red-inked eviction notice, not yet knowing that her world had changed while she slept, not yet understanding that the man who had been watching her from the darkness was about to step into the light. 2 days before the moment that would change everything, November 11th at 8:30 in the evening, Cassandra Morales twisted the throttle of her scooter and leaned into the rain-soaked curves of the Embarcadero. The November wind tore through San Francisco's empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Her delivery bag was empty. Her shift was done. She had earned $43 in tips, and her phone had buzzed 3 times with messages she could not afford to answer. The red-inked eviction notice sat in her jacket pocket like a death sentence, and she had exactly 5 days left to produce $300,000 or watch every child at the shelter be scattered into the system like leaves in a hurricane. She did not see the headlights until they were close. A black sedan cut across 2 lanes, and Cassandra wrenched the scooter hard left. The bike fishtailed. Her hand scraped asphalt. The scooter slid sideways beneath her, metal screaming against concrete, and she tumbled into the rain-soaked street with a force that drove the air from her lungs. When she finally stopped moving, her right side was burning and her left shoulder had taken the full impact. For 3 long seconds, she could not breathe. Could not think. Could only lie there in the cold as footsteps approached, measured, unhurried. Marco Russo stepped over her body like a man surveying a piece of broken machinery. He was 26 years old, beautiful in the way that cruelty sometimes is, with his uncle's dark eyes but none of his uncle's weight of consequence. He wore a cashmere coat worth more than everything Cassandra had owned before the fire. His shoes cost $3,000. His smile was a weapon. "Get her up," Marco said. 2 men lifted her by the arms. Her shoulder screamed. Blood ran from the gash above her eye, warm and bitter tasting, and she spat it onto the asphalt. Marco grabbed her jaw and forced her to look at him. "Where does my uncle keep his offshore account information?" His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "The access codes. The banks. Everything." "I don't know what you're talking about," Cassandra said, and her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "You are his maid. You clean his house. You have access." Marco's grip tightened. "Last chance. Tell me, or I put Emma on a bus to Nevada tonight. You understand? That little girl you love so much will disappear. We will sell her to people who will break her in ways you cannot imagine." Cassandra spat in his face. The first punch came from the right, a hook that caught her ribs and folded her forward. The second came from her left, a kick that sent her sprawling. Marco watched with his hands in his pockets as his men worked her over with methodical precision, fists, then kicks, then fists again. She curled into herself, protecting her face, and thought of Emma's drawing, the 2 stick figures holding hands. One labeled Cassie. One labeled me. They beat her until the world went grey around the edges. At 17 seconds past the moment her consciousness flickered out, Cassandra's hand found something sharp. A broken bottle, its edge honed by concrete and time. She did not think. Her body moved on instinct older than reason. The bottle found Marco's arm and opened it like a letter. He screamed. She rolled away from the next kick, came to her feet, and ran. 3 blocks. Her lungs burning. Her vision blurred. Her shoulder hanging loose and useless in its socket. She ran past dark storefronts and closed restaurants until her legs would not carry her anymore, and then she collapsed on the corner of 5th and Mission, gasping like a wounded animal. At 2:14 in the morning, November 12th, Cassandra stumbled through the automatic doors of San Francisco General Hospital's emergency room. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The smell of antiseptic and suffering hung thick in the air. A nurse with grey eyes and a practiced compassion looked at her once and knew, without asking, that this girl had not been in a car accident. She had been put down. They stitched her above the eye. Wrapped her shoulder. gave her ice packs and instructions she could not afford to follow. By 4:47 in the morning, she sat on the concrete curb outside the hospital's main entrance, $78 still somehow in her pocket, and the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders like an anchor dragging her toward the bottom of the sea. The November rain had stopped, but the cold remained. It seeped through her torn jacket and into her bones. She stared at her phone. Father Miguel had called 6 times. The hospital social worker had left business cards that sat useless in her pocket. A text message from Victoria's lawyer glowed on her screen, 24 hours to vacate the shelter or we will remove the children by force of federal authority. 24 hours. She stood on legs that shook. She took 3 steps toward the bus stop that would carry her to the Golden Gate Bridge, where the water was dark and the fall was long and nobody would ask her any questions ever again. The fog rolled in from the bay, thick and suffocating, and she thought about how easy it would be to keep walking. How tired she was. How completely she had failed. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Father Miguel with a photograph attached. Cassandra's hands shook as she opened it. Emma had drawn another picture. 2 stick figures holding hands. One was taller, wearing what might have been a uniform. One was smaller, with wild scribbled hair. Beneath them, in the careful letters of a 7-year-old who was learning to read, the words, one labeled Cassie. One labeled me. Colors for sad days. When she feels sad, look at this. Cassandra sat back down on the concrete curb and cried until the sun came up over the bay. But what she did not know, at that exact moment, was that Salvatore Russo had seen the hospital security footage at 2:17 in the morning. He had watched a girl who had been invisible to him stumble through glass doors and collapse in front of doctors. He had heard her name spoken by the nurse. Cassandra Morales. The girl who cleaned his house. The girl his men reported had gone to the children's shelter every evening without fail, working 2 jobs, eating nothing, pouring everything into the hands of a child who was not her own. And in that moment, Salvatore's entire empire had shifted on its axis. 12 men in black were already moving through the pre-dawn darkness. At 6:20 in the morning, November 12th, Marco Russo woke in his apartment to a silence so complete it seemed to have weight. The city was still asleep outside his windows. His arm throbbed where the bottle had opened it, and he reached instinctively for the gun on his nightstand. The lights came on. Salvatore Russo sat in the chair across from the bed, legs crossed, his cashmere coat draped perfectly over his shoulders like the robe of an emperor. Rocco stood at the bedroom door. Theo stood at the window. 9 other men, dressed in black, positioned throughout the apartment like ghosts who had been waiting there all night. Marco scrambled backward, his hand clutching the gun. He tried to raise it. Rocco was faster. The gun disappeared before Marco could even process the movement. Rocco ejected the magazine and placed both on the dresser with the precision of a surgeon. "Uncle," Marco said, and his voice was nothing like the voice that had been torturing Cassandra 6 hours earlier. This voice was high and terrified and very, very young. "I can explain. It is not what it looks like. I was just—" "You touched her," Salvatore said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like the sound of a door closing on something forever. "You threatened my daughter. You made a choice your father made before you, and your father is rotting in the ground because of it. She is nobody." Marco's voice rose, cracking with panic. "Just some delivery girl. Just some." Salvatore stood. He was 6'2", and when he stood, the room seemed to grow smaller. Marco's voice died in his throat like an animal sensing the moment of the kill. "She is the woman who saved my daughter when my own blood sold her," Salvatore said. "She is worth 1,000 of you." 1,000? Marco tried to run. He launched himself from the bed and dove toward the window. Rocco caught him by the back of his neck and hurled him against the wall. Plaster cracked. Blood bloomed from Marco's mouth. He collapsed to his knees, trembling like a cornered animal, his hands raised in surrender, his voice breaking into something that was barely human. "Please, uncle, please, I am family. You taught me that family comes first. I am sorry. I am sorry. Please. Salvatore looked at his nephew with eyes like storm-dark water, and in those eyes was every betrayal his family had ever endured. He nodded once. 6 men moved forward. Marco screamed as they dragged him toward the door, begging, sobbing, swearing revenge and redemption and promises he would never keep. The sounds he made were not words anymore. They were the sounds of something being broken down into components. His screams echoed down the hallway of the apartment building, echoed through the stairwell, echoed until a van door slammed and the city swallowed the sound. Salvatore walked to the window and looked out at the gray morning of San Francisco. Rocco stood quietly at his side. Where does he go? Salvatore asked. To the Morales, Rocco said. We tell them he has been selling information to the feds. We tell them he is the one who has been moving their territory. We tell them we discovered his treachery and we are delivering him as a sign of respect. And they will believe this. Yes. The Morales have been suspicious of him for months. This will be a mercy, from their perspective. They will handle what needs handling. Salvatore nodded. Marco Russo would never see the sun rise again. He would never draw another breath as a free man. His screams would fade into the background noise of the city, and within a week, he would cease to exist in any meaningful way. His name would not be spoken. His grave would not be marked. He would become the kind of ghost that even ghosts forgot. Justice, Salvatore understood, was not death. Death was too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. Justice was becoming invisible. Meanwhile, at 10 o'clock in the morning, November 12th, Victoria Ashford sat in her office on the 42nd floor of downtown San Francisco's most prestigious building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire bay. Her desk was made of imported Italian marble. Her net worth was $47 million, and she had built it on the principle that everyone, eventually, could be bought. She was on the phone with her lawyer, laughing, her voice dripping with the kind of cruelty that only comes from absolute certainty of impunity. Yes, evict them today, she was saying. I want those brats on the street by noon. Take everything that is movable. I want that shelter emptied like a tomb. Her assistant ran in through the mahogany doors, pale as bone, trembling. Behind her came 12 figures in tactical gear. Federal agents. FBI windbreakers. Serious faces. The lead agent, a woman with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had dedicated her life to justice, stepped forward with a warrant. Victoria Ashford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and human trafficking. Victoria's face went very still. She rose from her chair slowly, her lawyer already on the phone, her voice shrill with certainty that this was some kind of mistake. This is insane, she said. I am a respected businesswoman. There has been some kind of misunderstanding. My attorney is. The agent dropped a folder on her desk. Files spilled across the Italian marble. Photographs. Bank statements. Testimony. Everything that could be documented and proven, laid out like a map of her own corruption. Your partner, Robert Hargrove, has been running a human trafficking ring out of properties you co-own, the agent said. Her voice was neutral, the voice of someone delivering routine information. He has provided full testimony in exchange for protective custody. 14 victims recovered so far. Youngest was 9 years old. The color drained from Victoria's face like water from a broken vessel. That is impossible, she whispered. I did not know. I signed purchase orders but I did not know what they were for. Robert handled the. You signed the documents. Your accounts funded the operations. Your signature is on the agreements that permitted him to house victims on those properties. Whether you knew or not is no longer relevant. They cuffed her as she tried to stand. They read her rights as she demanded her lawyer. They walked her past her employees, past her investors, past the photographs on her wall of her at charity galas and museum openings, and when she emerged into the hallway, the cameras started flashing. News vans were already parked outside. Her collapse was not private. Her humiliation was not merciful. It was public, total, and permanent. As they led her into the elevator, she screamed, "This is Salvatore Russo. He did this. He set me up because I rejected him." The agent, still moving forward, still professional, did not even look at her. "Ms. Ashford, this investigation began 14 months ago. We have no connection to any Russo family interests. This is the result of federal law enforcement identifying criminal activity and pursuing it through proper channels." But Victoria knew better. She could feel the architecture of her own destruction, the way it had been built with precision, the way every piece fit together too perfectly. Her accounts had already been seized. Her assets frozen. She would spend the next 40 years in federal prison, minimum, with no parole, no protective custody, no mercy. By the time the sun set that day, her name would be synonymous with child trafficking. Her legacy would be defined by the children she had profited from hurting. Too quick for death. Too complete for recovery. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, November 12th, Robert Hargrove sat in federal interrogation with 2 FBI agents and the absolute certainty of a man who had finally understood that his own genius had been his downfall. He had believed himself untouchable. He had believed his connections were deep enough and his money was vast enough. He had believed wrong. "I will tell you everything," he was saying, his hands shaking, his voice cracking. "Everything. The accounts, the properties, the payments, the names. Just give me witness protection. Please. You have to give me witness protection because they will kill me. All of them. The families. All of them. I sold information to everyone. The Morales, the Colombians, even Russo's people. I am a dead man unless you protect me." The agent nodded and left the room. The door opened again and Salvatore Russo walked in. He was no longer in his cashmere coat. He was in a suit of charcoal grey, tailored to fit his shoulders, worth more money than Robert had made in his first 5 years of crime. 2 federal agents followed him in and then positioned themselves at the door with an air of disinterest that suggested they would be looking the other way for the next few minutes. Robert's face drained of every drop of color. "No," he said. "No. Please. No." "Yes," Salvatore said. He sat across from Robert with the ease of a man sitting down for an afternoon coffee. "You thought you were untouchable. You thought that if you had enough money and enough information, you could operate without consequences. You thought wrong." "I will disappear," Robert said, his voice rising to a shriek. "I will leave the country tonight. I will go to South America. I will go anywhere. Just name it. Money is not a problem. I have resources that you cannot even." "You will go to federal prison," Salvatore said. His voice was quiet now, which was worse than if he had screamed. 40 years minimum. General population. No protective custody. No segregation. Every family you betrayed will receive a detailed map of exactly where you are and exactly when you are there. They will have 40 years to decide what you deserve. Robert started sobbing. Not tears. Actual sobbing, the kind that comes from the deepest part of a man when he finally understands that he has condemned himself. "Please," he gasped. "Just kill me. Please. I am begging you. Just kill me. Make it quick. Make it fast. Just kill me." Salvatore stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Robert with something that might have been pity or might have been something far colder. "Too merciful," Salvatore said. He walked toward the door. Robert's screams followed him down the hallway, echoing off concrete and steel, the sound of a man whose future had just been erased. The sound of justice being delivered, not through death, but through the systematic and absolute destruction of everything he had believed made him invulnerable. By sunset on November 12th, the dominoes had fallen. Marco Russo had ceased to exist. Victoria Ashford was being processed into federal custody, her face already on the news, her name already becoming synonymous with the children she had profited from. Robert Hargrove was beginning to understand that his remaining years would be spent in a cell with men whose families he had destroyed. And Cassandra Morales, sitting on the curb outside the hospital, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, still did not know that her world had changed. She still did not understand that the man who had been watching her from the darkness was about to step into the light. For months had passed since the November rain stopped falling on San Francisco's empty streets, and Cassandra Morales no longer counted her dollars in the dark. St. Catherine's Children's Foundation now stood where the old shelter had been, its new sign gleaming above freshly painted doors, the entire building renovated with funds that had arrived in 3 separate anonymous transfers totaling $2.3 million. The chapel smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The classrooms held supplies that had never been begged for. The kitchen had a full refrigerator. Children slept in rooms with clean sheets, their nightmares softening with each passing week. Cassandra stood in the main office, reviewing applications for the nursing position she no longer needed to fill herself. Her own nursing degree hung framed on the wall behind her desk, earned through scholarship money that had materialized in her account the morning after Salvatore's men had completed their work. The degree was hers. Earned. Real. Not charity, though she knew the truth of its origin, and that truth no longer made her ashamed. Emma ran through the doorway, her second-grade backpack bouncing against her small shoulders, her eyes bright in a way that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The silent, traumatized child who had clutched Cassandra's hand in the darkness had been transformed by routine, safety, and the patient presence of a man who taught her Italian on Tuesday evenings and attended every single piano recital. Vivi, I got a 100 on my spelling test, Emma announced, waving the paper, her pronunciation of Cassandra's nickname still slightly imperfect and therefore perfect. And I learned a new song. Can we play it when Papa comes tonight? Cassandra's chest tightened at the word. Papa. Emma had started using it 3 weeks ago, without permission asked and without hesitation. Salvatore had been in the chapel when she first said it. Rocco had been present. The lieutenant had reported that the boss had simply stopped moving for 17 seconds, then turned away quietly, his jaw set in that way that meant he was breaking. Father Miguel entered carrying a stack of donation receipts, his elderly face creased with knowing amusement. He had conducted 42 years of masses in San Francisco, and he recognized the particular ache of love being rebuilt from rubble. She has been asking when her father is visiting again, Miguel said, settling into the chair across from Cassandra's desk. His voice carried the gentle weight of a man who had heard 10,000 confessions and understood every one. Tonight, Cassandra said. He is teaching her Italian. And you? Father Miguel leaned forward, his grey eyes sharp despite his 73 years. When will you admit what is happening between you two? Cassandra felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Nothing is happening. We are just... She stopped. The lie sat between them, obvious and trembling. Father Miguel smiled. You are lying to a priest, child. He comes here every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. He sits through her piano recitals. He looks at you like you hung the moon and all the stars besides it. He brought new beds for the East Wing without being asked. He is a dangerous man, yes. But he is also a man who has been alone for years and found someone who sees him instead of his power. That is rare. Do not waste it. At 8 o'clock that evening, the rain had not started, but November air carried its promise. Salvatore arrived in the black SUV, but he came alone, without his men, walking through the shelter's front door like a man entering a place that had become sacred to him. Emma shrieked with joy and launched herself at him. He caught her, spun her once, then set her down with the careful gentleness of someone who had learned that children were fragile. She chatted in broken Italian, showed him her spelling test, and dragged him toward the piano room where she had prepared a piece she called Papa's Song, though it was in fact for Elise played at half speed with 3 wrong notes that Salvatore would pretend not to notice. Cassandra watched from the hallway. She watched how his entire frame softened in the child's presence. She watched how he listened to her stumbling Italian with the attention a diplomat might give to a treaty negotiation. She watched how, when Emma finally grew tired and Father Miguel took her upstairs to bed, Salvatore's expression shifted into something more complex and more dangerous. He found Cassandra in the chapel. She had known where he would look. The chapel had become their place, the place where silence felt like speaking. Rain began outside then, soft November rain that sounded like forgiveness. The stained glass windows caught the streetlight and threw colored shapes across the wooden pews. "I need to tell you about my brother," Salvatore said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. He did not sit. He stood at the far end of the chapel, his expensive coat hanging open, showing the white shirt beneath, the fabric worth more than Cassandra's first month of rent. "You do not have to," Cassandra whispered. "Yes, I do." He moved toward her slowly, each step measured. 5 years ago, my brother Antonio sold our family roots to the Morelli organization for $2 million. He took my daughter and disappeared into the darkness. I had to choose, let him walk free and lose everything I had built, or kill my own blood. Kill the man who shared my mother's face, my father's name. Cassandra's throat closed. She could not speak. "I chose mercy," Salvatore continued. His eyes were storm gray in the chapel light. "I let him go. And because of that weakness, because I believed I could control the consequences with money and power, 14 of my men died in the war that followed. My daughter was gone. And my wife, Maria, she did not survive the heartbreak. She lasted 1 year after learning our child had vanished. 1 year of hoping. 1 year of dying." He paused. Rain drummed against the chapel roof. "I swore I would never be weak again. I swore I would never let mercy cloud my judgment. I built walls so high that nothing could reach me. Nothing could break me." He was close now. Close enough that she could see the small scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, close enough that she could hear him breathing. "But then I watched you save Theo's life, knowing it would cost you your shift at the restaurant. I watched you fight for children who carried no blood of yours. I watched you stand between Emma and people who wanted to destroy her, even when you had only $78 and a prayer. And I realized I had been wrong about weakness. Weakness is not mercy. Weakness is what everyone else was doing. Strength is what you do when you have nothing and you fight anyway." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because for 15 years I have been searching for my daughter. 3 years of that search, I found nothing but ghosts. But when I found her, Cassandra, I found you. And now I cannot imagine my life without either of you. Now the thought of returning to those walls, to that silence, to that emptiness, feels like a death sentence I have already served." "I am still nobody," Cassandra said. Her voice was barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind. A delivery girl with a GED and a borrowed degree from a man whose name appears on no paperwork. "I have nothing. I am nothing." Salvatore reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm. His grip was gentle. "You are the woman who rebuilt herself from the ashes of fire and poverty. You are the woman who stands as my equal, who speaks to me without fear, who would leave me without hesitation if I ever asked her to compromise herself. You are the woman who makes me want to be more than what I am. More than what I have been forced to become. You are everything, Cassandra. You have been everything since the night I found you bleeding on the hospital steps." He kissed her then. Slow. Certain. A kiss that felt like a promise spoken in a language older than words. For months of silent protection and small gestures culminating in this moment, in the chapel where Father Miguel had seen them both and understood that some love stories are not written by fate but chosen by two people who had every reason to choose nothing. She kissed him back. 1 year later, November 15th, St. Catherine's annual fundraiser filled the main hall with 200 people, donors, city officials, families. The shelter now housed 60 children, fully staffed with trained counselors and nurses. Cassandra stood in the receiving line in a simple blue dress, her nursing degree framed on her office wall, her life framed in small victories and hard-won peace. Emma performed a piano piece, flawless and confident, the notes rising into the chapel's vaulted ceiling like prayers answered. The silent, traumatized child now thrived, her smile bright and unguarded, her laughter present in the hallways every single day. Salvatore watched from the back, Rocco and Theo beside him in dark suits that meant nothing now because the work of ruin was complete. Marco Russo had ceased to exist, swallowed by federal prison and the knowledge that family business would hunt him for 40 years. Victoria Ashford rotted in a cell for fraud and exploitation of minors, her name synonymous with cruelty, her face erased from every society page. Robert Hargrove had hanged himself in his cell after 6 months, unable to bear the systematic destruction of everything he thought made him invulnerable. The Morelli family wants a meeting, Rocco said quietly. They are asking about territory. Salvatore did not take his eyes off Emma's small hands moving across the piano keys. Tomorrow. Tonight is for family. Theo smiled. Never thought I would see the day. Neither did I, Salvatore said. After the recital, Cassandra found him outside in the November rain, soft this time, gentle and cleansing rather than cutting. She handed him a photograph, Emma's class picture, her smile bright and real, the smile of a child who had learned that the world contained people who stayed. She looks like her mother, Salvatore said, studying the picture. His voice carried a weight that would never fully lift, but the weight had changed. It was no longer despair. It was love made permanent through loss. She has your stubbornness, Cassandra said. And your heart. He turned to face her. The city lights caught in his eyes. A year ago you had $78 and no future. Now you have everything. How did this happen? You happened, Cassandra said. You happened, and you did not leave. Salvatore pulled her close, and they stood in the rain, two people rebuilt from ashes, choosing each other despite every reason not to. The fire that had taken her apartment was gone. The hunger that had driven her through double shifts was gone. The fear that had lived in her chest like a second heartbeat was gone. Only this remained. Rain. November. A man and a woman and a child, standing together in the darkness, refusing to let it separate them. Only this remained, and only this ever mattered. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Cassandra Morales lost everything in fire and poverty. She rebuilt herself one impossible choice at a time. And when the most dangerous man in San Francisco followed her home, he did not find weakness. He found strength. He found his daughter. He found his equal. The villains crumbled. Marco Russo vanished into the darkness he created. Victoria Ashford and Robert Hargrove rotted in federal cells, their empires dust, their names forgotten by everyone except the children they had tried to destroy. The woman with $78 became the woman who saved an empire by refusing to let it corrupt her. That is the power of staying. Of fighting. Of choosing love when the world demands surrender. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and fighting for what matters, drop a like right now. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about people who refuse to break. Share this with someone who needs to remember that family is not where you start but who stays when everything falls apart. Comment below, have you ever met someone who changed your life by simply refusing to leave? Tell us your story. We read every single one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing these stories matter. See you tomorrow.